Marcus stood at the bustling airport, his heart fluttering with both excitement and nervous anticipation. It was his first time flying alone, and though he had traveled many times before, nothing could have prepared him for what was about to unfold. He rolled his black suitcase confidently across the gleaming, polished floor, absorbing the hum of announcements and the steady murmur of passengers. Just moments ago, he had returned from a week-long visit to his grandparents in another state, a trip filled with warm memories of his grandfather's fascinating tales of a challenging yet hopeful past, and his grandmother's irresistible chocolate chip cookies that always seemed to make everything better. Despite the fun and the love he had experienced, nothing compared to the comfort of home and the thought of reuniting with his parents, especially knowing that his family's reputation carried weight in ways he could only partially understand. As Marcus made his way toward the check-in counter, he clutched his ticket and passport securely in his jacket pocket. His parents had always taught him that the world could be harsh and unfair, but if he held on to his dignity and treated others with respect, no one could ever truly diminish his worth. That lesson echoed in his mind, especially on days like today when his resolve was put to the test. He was determined to show that he was responsible and capable, despite the subtle judgments that sometimes came from the way he looked or spoke. However, as soon as he reached the counter, his composed demeanor began to falter. A flight attendant named Gloria, with a face set in a permanent expression of disdain, eyed him with a suspicion that seemed to seep into every word she would speak. Her gaze was not the casual curiosity of a busy worker, but a cold, calculated scrutiny that made Marcus's stomach churn. He mustered his courage and explained politely, "I believe my ticket is valid. I can even show you my passport if you'd like." But Gloria paid no heed to his calm explanation. Instead, she turned the ticket over in her hands, as if it were an object of fraud rather than a simple document, pressing her finger along its edge as if searching for hidden mistakes. Her tone was laced with cruelty as she said, "Kid, I know my job well enough to tell when something's off. I don't care who booked this ticket. I just know it doesn't look right." Marcus's heart pounded in his ears as he tightened his grip on the strap of his crossbody bag, his voice quavering slightly as he pleaded, "But this ticket was booked directly through the airline system. I really don't understand why you're saying it's fake." Yet, instead of verifying his words, Gloria's smirk grew wider, a smirk that carried not just skepticism, but an air of superiority and malice. The tension at the counter was palpable, and every nearby passenger seemed to sense that something was deeply wrong. In that moment, as if to punctuate her authority, Gloria did something that Marcus would never forget. Without warning, she snatched the ticket from his hand and tore it cleanly in half. The sound of the paper ripping echoed harshly around them, like the snap of a fragile promise shattering into irreparable pieces. Marcus froze, staring in disbelief at the torn fragments scattered on the counter. To him, each jagged edge symbolized a deliberate attempt to strip away his dignity, a public humiliation meant to mark him as less than he truly was. A hush fell over the check-in area. Some passengers frowned in silent disapproval, while others averted their eyes, unwilling to face the painful reality of witnessing such cruelty. A middle-aged woman sighed in exasperation, and a young man in a hoodie discreetly began recording the incident on his phone. Yet, in that sea of indifference, no one stepped forward to defend the young boy who had been unjustly treated. Marcus felt an overwhelming mix of embarrassment and anger. He knew he could scream or demand an explanation, but deep down, he also understood that nothing he said in that moment would change the outcome. His mind raced, and amidst the shock, he realized he needed to act with a calm determination, a lesson his father had instilled in him time and again. Slowly, with trembling hands, he reached for his phone and dialed his father's number. His father, Jonathan Coates, was a man known for his quiet strength and firm sense of justice. He had built an empire in the airline industry and never hesitated to stand up when something was amiss. On the other end of the line, the silence that followed was heavy with unspoken concern. "Marcus, are you okay? You're at the check-in counter, right?" his father asked in a tone that was steady and calm, even though Marcus could sense the simmering anger beneath his words. "Dad, there's a problem," Marcus managed to say, his voice wavering as he explained that the flight attendant was refusing to let him board, claiming that his ticket was fake and even tearing it up right in front of him. There was a long pause on the line before his father's voice returned, now edged with a quiet but unmistakable fury. "Where exactly are you standing?" he demanded. Marcus quickly scanned the area and replied that he was still near the security checkpoint. His father's next words were like a protective command. "Don't go anywhere. I'm on my way." In that moment, those 4 words wrapped around Marcus like a warm, reassuring blanket, even as the raw sting of humiliation still burned in his chest. Back at the counter, Gloria continued to wear her indifferent expression, as if nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. Her eyes, cold and unyielding, held a trace of smug satisfaction, as if she had just confirmed a suspicion she had long harbored. "Go find another ticket if you have enough money to buy one," she said dismissively, her words echoing around the space with a venom that cut deeply into Marcus's already wounded pride. Each syllable felt like a calculated blow, an act meant to underscore his inferiority in her eyes. For Marcus, those words were more than just an insult. They were a public declaration that he was not worthy, that his existence was somehow less valid in the eyes of the world. The surrounding air seemed to freeze, and time itself slowed as Marcus stared at the ruined remnants of his ticket. The shattered paper was a stark reminder of the injustice he had just endured, a deliberate act of cruelty that left him feeling exposed and vulnerable in a crowded space. His mind swirled with thoughts of fairness and dignity, and he could almost hear his father's voice urging him to stand strong, even as his inner turmoil threatened to overwhelm him. He longed for someone to speak up, to acknowledge the injustice of the situation, yet every person around him seemed to be caught in their own silent resignation. Marcus's hands were shaking as he attempted to gather the torn pieces of his ticket, as if by piecing them back together he could somehow restore the sense of order that had been so violently disrupted. It was a small, desperate act, a silent protest against the cruelty of a woman who saw him not as a young boy with dreams and potential, but merely as an inconvenience, a stereotype, an object to be dismissed. In that moment, his heart pounded with a mixture of anger, hurt, and a quiet determination to reclaim his dignity, even if the battle was far from over. His father's imminent arrival was the only beacon of hope in that grim scene, a promise that someone who truly cared would not allow this injustice to stand. Marcus's eyes welled up with unshed tears as he struggled to maintain his composure in front of a room full of strangers. The humiliating spectacle, punctuated by Gloria's relentless cruelty, was not just a personal attack, it was an assault on his very sense of self, and while the hurt was profound, it was tempered by the knowledge that his father's swift intervention would soon bring justice, or at least a measure of protection, to a boy who had done nothing but try to fly on his own. As the minutes ticked by, the memory of the incident began to settle in like a dark shadow over the moment's initial excitement. The check-in area, which had once been a simple gateway to a new adventure, had now become a stage for a drama of prejudice and cruelty. Marcus felt as if his entire world had been turned upside down by the callous actions of one person. Actions that were not only cruel but deeply unjust. The harsh reality was that Gloria's behavior was not an isolated lapse of professionalism. It was a reflection of a larger, more insidious bias that Marcus had been subtly taught to expect in the world. Yet, even amid the betrayal and pain, there was a spark of resilience in his eyes. With each tremor in his hands and each shallow breath, Marcus vowed silently that he would not allow this incident to define him. He would carry the scars of this humiliation as a reminder of the battle he had faced. A battle fought not with fists or shouts, but with quiet dignity and an unyielding sense of self-worth. His father's impending arrival was not just a rescue. It was a symbol that justice, however delayed, would prevail. In that frozen moment of despair and anger, Marcus clung to the hope that his future would not be dictated by the cruelty of one insensitive flight attendant, but by the strength and courage he had inherited from those who loved him unconditionally. And so, as he waited, with his phone pressed to his ear and his eyes fixed on the indifferent figure of Gloria, Marcus prepared himself for the storm that was coming. A storm that promised to challenge the cruelty of prejudice and, hopefully, restore a sense of justice in a world that had, for too long, turned a blind eye to such injustices. Marcus had been looking forward to this day for weeks. At just 13 years old, he was finally flying alone after spending a delightful week with his grandparents out in another state. His heart danced with a mix of excitement and nervousness as he maneuvered his black suitcase across the shiny marble floor of the bustling airport. The soft hum of announcements and the steady chatter of passengers filled the air as he clutched his ticket and passport tightly in his jacket pocket. Growing up, his parents had taught him that life was not always fair, but that dignity and respect were his true treasures. With these words echoing in his mind, Marcus felt determined to handle every situation with grace, even if the world sometimes seemed unkind. However, the moment he reached the check-in counter, Marcus's hope began to crumble. Standing behind the counter was Gloria, a flight attendant whose cold eyes and haughty manner immediately set him on edge. Her expression was unyielding, almost as if she had been waiting for an opportunity to judge him. Marcus politely explained that his ticket was valid, offering to show his passport if necessary, but Gloria's response was laced with cruelty. She flipped the ticket between her fingers with an air of disdain, as if searching for a hidden flaw that did not exist. "Kid, I know my job well enough to tell when something isn't right," she said in a tone that left no room for argument. Her words stung like a harsh wind, and before Marcus could defend himself further, she snatched the ticket from his trembling hand and tore it into two ragged pieces. The sound of paper ripping echoed painfully in the otherwise busy terminal, and for a moment, time itself seemed to stand still. As the torn fragments lay scattered on the counter, Marcus felt a crushing humiliation seep into his bones. Every piece of that shredded ticket felt like a personal blow, a declaration that he did not belong, and that his worth was measured by the color of his skin. The other passengers around him reacted with shock and silence. A middle-aged man shook his head disapprovingly before pulling his suitcase along, while a young woman in a business suit discreetly recorded the incident on her phone without offering a single word of comfort. Even an airport employee near the security checkpoint observed the unfolding drama with an unreadable expression. In that moment, Marcus's heart ached with a bitter loneliness. He was a young boy caught in a storm of injustice, and no one was there to stand up for him. Gloria's cruelty did not end there. With a voice as cold as ice, she sneered, "Go find another ticket if you can afford one." Her words were not merely instructions. They were a merciless attack on his self-esteem, a declaration that he was unworthy of the same respect as every other passenger. Marcus felt the rising anger inside him, a tumult of hurt and indignation, yet he forced himself to remain calm. He knew that any outburst on his part would only worsen the situation, giving Gloria even more ammunition to use against him. Clutching the strap of his bag as if it were a lifeline, he pulled out his phone with shaking fingers and dialed his father's number. On the other end of the line, his father's familiar, steady voice provided a small measure of comfort amid the storm. "Marcus, are you okay? Are you at the check-in counter?" his father asked, his tone calm yet edged with concern. Marcus's voice wavered as he explained, "Dad, there's a problem. The flight attendant won't let me board. She said my ticket is fake and tore it right in front of me." A heavy silence followed on the line, and Marcus could almost picture his father's face tightening with anger, a look he had heard about but never seen up close. That silence was quickly broken by his father's firm command. "Where exactly are you standing?" Marcus glanced around the terminal, spotted the sign for the security checkpoint, and replied in a soft, measured tone, "I'm still at the ticket counter near the security checkpoint." His father's response was immediate and unyielding. "Don't go anywhere. I'm on my way." Those words, though simple, brought a flicker of hope in the midst of Marcus's overwhelming humiliation. Meanwhile, Gloria continued her callous behavior with an air of detached satisfaction. Standing behind the counter, she crossed her arms and cast a cold, superior look at Marcus, seemingly convinced that she had done nothing wrong. As another airport employee, a middle-aged man in a neat uniform approached and examined the torn ticket pieces, he asked in a neutral tone, "What is going on here?" Gloria merely shrugged and replied evenly, "It's nothing. It's just a boy trying to board a plane with a suspicious ticket." Every word she spoke twisted the truth further, turning Marcus from a hopeful young traveler into a problem to be dismissed and ridiculed. As passengers milled about, their movements slowed in a collective moment of uncomfortable silence. No one stepped forward to defend Marcus, and each whispered glance only deepened the sting of injustice. Even when a middle-aged woman in a business dress finally confronted Gloria, saying softly, "I just saw you tear up that boy's ticket. Are you sure you followed the proper procedure?" Gloria's response was cool and unrepentant. "Ma'am, I'm just doing my job. This ticket shows signs of being counterfeit, and I can't let him board with an invalid ticket." The woman's disappointed shake of her head was met with a barely concealed irritation on Gloria's part, before a sudden ping from her radio cut through the tension. A voice from the radio informed her, "Gloria, the management office wants to see you right now." Gloria's face froze, her earlier smug expression giving way to a flicker of uncertainty. She glanced nervously toward Marcus, who still stood silently clutching his phone and the remnants of his ticket. Before she could gather her thoughts, an airport staff member hurried into the check-in area with news that sent a ripple of shock through the room. "Gloria," he said in a tense voice, "the airline's CEO is on his way here." The announcement spread like wildfire. From the main entrance, a tall man in a perfectly tailored suit strode purposefully toward the counter. It was Jonathan Coates, a man whose influence in the airline industry was well known, and he was coming not as a pilot or executive today, but as a protective father. Marcus's heart skipped a beat when he spotted his father moving through the terminal with determined strides. Despite the chaos and his own inner turmoil, a surge of relief mixed with determination filled him. He did not need to shout or create a scene. All he needed was to wait for his father's intervention. In the meantime, the atmosphere around the counter grew increasingly charged. Other passengers and employees alike sensed that something significant was about to happen, their expressions a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Jonathan Coates, now standing at the center of the unfolding drama, did not spare a single glance around as he made his way directly to the counter where his son stood. His eyes were steely and focused solely on Marcus, whose small frame was a stark contrast to the strength radiating from his father. Torn ticket stubs lay on the counter as damning evidence of the humiliation inflicted upon his son. The sight of those fragments tightened Jonathan's chest with a deep paternal pain. A pain quickly replaced by a burning determination to right this egregious wrong. Gloria, now visibly shaken by the approaching storm of authority, tried to maintain her composure, but the earlier arrogance that had fueled her every action was vanishing in the face of the undeniable power and presence of Jonathan Coates. Employees around them froze in silent anticipation, their eyes fixed on the confrontation that was about to unfold. The tension was palpable, and every whispered word or shifting gaze only heightened the sense of impending justice. As Jonathan reached the counter, he spoke in a calm yet forceful tone that resonated through the crowded terminal. His voice carried not just the authority of a seasoned industry leader, but the unmistakable warmth and protective fierceness of a father. "Gloria, explain exactly what happened here," he demanded, his eyes locked on hers. In that moment, every bystander seemed to hold their breath, sensing that this confrontation would determine more than just a boarding dispute. It would serve as a stand against prejudice and cruelty. Marcus, though still trembling from the earlier humiliation, felt a spark of hope ignite within him. His father's unwavering presence transformed his despair into a quiet confidence. Even as Gloria fumbled for words, trying to justify her actions by citing rules and experience, the onlookers could see that her justification was nothing more than a veneer for her deep-seated bias. The hurt in Marcus's eyes told a story of a boy who was brave enough to face humiliation head-on. A boy who was far more dignified than anyone could imagine. In that charged moment, the check-in counter became a stage for a powerful lesson in fairness and justice. Jonathan's intervention was not just about a ruined ticket. It was a resounding declaration that no one, regardless of how insignificant they might seem in someone's eyes, deserved to be treated with contempt and cruelty. As Marcus looked up at his father, he knew that this day, painful as it was, would not break him. Instead, it would become a turning point, a moment that reaffirmed his belief in the strength of his character and the enduring power of compassion and justice. By the time Jonathan had finished speaking, the entire terminal seemed to exhale a long-held breath. Gloria's demeanor had shifted from cold superiority to a palpable discomfort as she realized that her actions were no longer shielded by anonymity or indifference. And while the memory of the incident would remain a painful scar in Marcus's heart, the support and protection of his father offered a promise of redemption and change. In that moment, amidst the bustling energy of the airport, it was clear that sometimes, even in the face of blatant cruelty, hope and justice find a way to prevail. Marcus's heart pounded in his ears as he watched the scene unfold at the check-in counter. Earlier that day, he had been filled with cautious excitement at the prospect of flying alone, but now his dreams were shattered by the cruel actions of a flight attendant named Gloria. Gloria, who prided herself on enforcing the rules without question, had torn up his valid ticket simply because, in her eyes, he did not belong. Now, as Marcus stood there trembling, his father, Jonathan Coates, had arrived, like a guardian angel, determined to set things right. Jonathan halted directly in front of the counter, his steely eyes locking onto Gloria with a gaze that seemed to cut through her practiced facade. For a few long seconds he said nothing, letting the oppressive silence speak volumes. That silence weighed heavily on Gloria, making her feel more exposed than any sharp words could have. Finally, Jonathan's voice broke through the stillness, deep and sharp, like the edge of a well-honed knife. "Who tore up my son's ticket?" he demanded. His question hung in the air, heavy with the promise of accountability. Gloria swallowed hard and tried to maintain her calm composure. Crossing her arms, she replied in a measured tone, "I did, because the ticket appeared to be fraudulent." Her voice was firm, yet the words rang hollow in the charged atmosphere. Jonathan tilted his head, his eyes narrowing as he pressed further. "What signs made you think the ticket was fraudulent?" he asked, his tone both incredulous and piercing. In that moment, Gloria's mind raced. She hadn't even bothered to check the system. She had made her decision the moment she saw Marcus. Deep down, she knew the real reason: her prejudice. But she couldn't bring herself to admit it aloud. Instead, her voice faltered as she stammered, "I have experience in these matters. I've seen many cases where passengers try to board with invalid tickets, and this boy showed suspicious signs." Jonathan's silence was deafening as he considered her feeble explanation. Then, raising a single accusatory eyebrow, he asked, "Suspicious signs? Could you be more specific?" For the first time, Gloria realized she was cornered. The room seemed to close in around her as other staff members gathered near the counter and nearby passengers stopped to watch. Their expectant eyes bore down on her, demanding a reasonable explanation. A demand she knew she could never satisfy. Before Gloria could answer, another voice cut through the tension. "Mr. Coates, I apologize for this inconvenience. I'm Richard, the shift manager for the airport today." A well-dressed man in a crisp black suit approached, his expression trying to mask the discomfort of the situation. Jonathan turned slightly towards him, his stern gaze softening just a touch upon recognizing Richard. "Do you know what just happened to my son?" Jonathan asked, his voice steady and commanding. Richard glanced between Marcus and Gloria, his eyes lingering on the torn ticket fragments that lay on the counter as undeniable evidence of humiliation "I just received the report, and it seems the situation is more serious than I thought," he said, his tone betraying a hint of regret for the unfolding chaos. Jonathan folded his arms and continued, "One of your employees tore up my son's ticket without even checking the system. There was no evidence to support that his ticket was fraudulent, yet you humiliated a child in the middle of this terminal. How will your airport address this grave error?" Richard's face turned ashen as he realized the magnitude of what had transpired. "I assure you that we will conduct a thorough investigation. If wrongdoing is found, appropriate action will be taken," he promised, his voice wavering ever so slightly under the weight of responsibility. Jonathan's gaze, however, remained unyielding as he pressed further. "Good, but I'm not here for vague assurances. I want to see real action." Richard did not waste a moment. "Gloria, you are to be temporarily suspended pending an investigation. Please step away from the counter immediately." For the first time that day, Gloria's confident mask slipped. Her face turned pale as she realized that she had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. Her protestations, "I was just following protocol," fell flat under the stern command from Richard. Jonathan's expression softened ever so slightly as he moved closer to Marcus, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. The young boy, who had endured so much indignity already, looked up at his father with eyes that mingled sorrow with the flicker of hope. Even though he remained silent, his steadfast gaze conveyed that he was not willing to accept such injustice without a fight. As the tension in the terminal reached a fever pitch, Gloria found herself isolated. The murmurs of the onlookers changed from sympathetic glances to looks of judgment and contempt. Gloria had never imagined that things could escalate so quickly. When she had decided to tear Marcus's ticket, she believed, in her misguided arrogance, that no one would care enough to challenge her actions. But now, with Jonathan's imposing presence and the unwavering stares of both passengers and colleagues, she could no longer hide behind excuses. Jonathan's voice broke through the murmurs once again as he addressed Richard. "You still haven't answered my question, Richard." The airport manager's lips pressed together as he tried to maintain his composure. "Mr. Coates, I understand the gravity of this situation. I promise an internal investigation will be conducted and we will take the necessary actions," he said carefully. Jonathan's eyes narrowed further as he repeated slowly, "Internal investigation." His tone made it clear he was not interested in hollow promises. "Do you think I'll accept such a vague answer? My son was humiliated, not because there was any evidence to support your claim, but because of personal prejudice." At these words, Gloria's resolve crumbled further. She clenched her fists, knowing that she could not escape the truth any longer. Richard, now looking defeated, managed a feeble, I understand." Jonathan continued, "As I said, Ms. Gloria will be suspended immediately pending our investigation, and we will reissue a ticket for my son, this time in first class, as an apology from your airline." Jonathan's words cut through the murmur of the crowd like a cold wind. "Do you think a first-class seat can erase the humiliation my son just suffered?" he scoffed, his tone laced with disbelief. Richard stuttered in response, his eyes darting nervously. No, I didn't mean..." But Jonathan's glare shifted decisively from Richard to Gloria. "Now, Ms. Gloria, do you have anything to say to my son?" he demanded, his voice both gentle and unyielding as he looked directly at Marcus, who stood with unwavering determination despite his bruised spirit. Gloria's mind raced with conflicting thoughts. She had always been in control, the one whose decisions were unquestioned. Yet now, as she faced the unwavering gaze of a child who had suffered because of her bias, she felt a profound sense of regret. After a long pause, her voice came out haltingly. "I'm sorry if I made you feel offended." Marcus blinked silently. In his mind, he heard the unspoken truth that her apology was as empty as it was forced. Jonathan raised an eyebrow at her feeble attempt. "If," he repeated, emphasizing the inadequacy of her apology. Realizing her error yet unable to fully retract her actions, Gloria tried once more, her voice softer and tinged with genuine remorse. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done that." For a brief moment, silence reigned over the terminal as Jonathan's eyes searched hers for sincerity. Then he turned his focus to Marcus. "What do you think?" he asked gently, not imposing his will but inviting his son to speak his truth. Marcus took a deep breath and, with quiet resolve, said, "I just want to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." His words, though simple, resonated powerfully through the hushed crowd. Some onlookers even nodded in quiet approval, their faces reflecting a shared desire for justice. Richard quickly interjected, "We are committed to making changes. I will arrange a meeting with the leadership to review our employee training procedures, and I hope Mr. Coates can join us to help improve the system." Jonathan studied Richard's face for a long moment, his silence speaking volumes before he finally said, "I'll think about it." Relief mingled with lingering tension as Richard signaled for another employee to bring a new ticket, which was placed carefully on the counter. Jonathan, with a reassuring smile, placed his hand on Marcus's shoulder and asked softly, "Ready to board?" Marcus looked at the pristine ticket and then up at his father. Though he nodded, deep down he knew that this incident was only the beginning of a long journey toward real change. The atmosphere in the terminal had shifted unmistakably. Gloria, still standing by the counter, could feel the collective judgment of those around her. No one dared to meet her eyes, and the silence around her was a stark reminder of the truth she could no longer deny. She had discriminated, she had overstepped her authority, and now she was being held accountable. Sensing that the matter was far from resolved, Richard quickly pulled out his phone and called the HR director's office. "Lisa, we have a serious situation at the check-in counter. I need you here now," he said. Within moments, Lisa arrived, a poised, no-nonsense woman in her 50s with neatly styled hair and a sharp business suit. As she took in the scene, her eyes quickly assessed every detail. Jonathan standing resolutely, Richard looking anxious, Gloria with her head bowed in shame, and a crowd of passengers witnessing the unfolding drama. Lisa approached Jonathan and extended her hand with professional courtesy. "Mr. Coates? I'm Lisa, the HR director. I've been briefed on the situation and would like to hear your account directly," she said. Jonathan shook her hand firmly and began, "My son purchased a legitimate ticket through this airline's system. He came to check in like any other passenger, yet your employee decided that a young black boy with an economy ticket could not be a legitimate traveler." Lisa then turned her stern gaze on Gloria. "Miss Gloria, did you check the system before making your decision?" she asked. Gloria's eyes flickered with uncertainty as she licked her lips, unable to provide a convincing answer. In that moment, the terminal fell into a heavy silence. Marcus stood beside his father, his small frame a poignant reminder of the cruelty he had endured, while Jonathan's unwavering stance offered him a glimmer of hope. The confrontation had exposed not only Gloria's personal bias, but also a larger systemic failure. For Marcus, whose journey had been marred by injustice, this episode marked a turning point. A painful yet necessary step toward ensuring that no other child would have to suffer the same indignity. Marcus's heart still pounded from the earlier ordeal when Gloria had cruelly torn his valid ticket. Now, in a tense exchange at the check-in counter, Gloria's justification for her callous actions was falling apart. In a trembling voice, she mumbled, I believed the ticket was counterfeit." Before she could add another word, Lisa, the firm and no-nonsense HR director, cut her off sharply. "You believed? At this airline, we do not operate on personal belief. We operate on data. Did you check the system?" Gloria's face reddened, and she bit her lip, lowering her head, as if the very question stung. Lisa then turned to Richard, the shift manager, and said in a steady tone, "I need the scan history for this check-in counter from the past 30 minutes." Richard immediately began tapping away at his tablet. Moments later, the screen displayed a list of all ticket scans, and the evidence was clear. Marcus's name was not on the list of denied tickets. Lisa's eyes bore into Gloria as she demanded, "Do you have an explanation?" Gloria clenched her fists, her voice wavering as she tried to defend herself. I was just trying to protect the legitimacy of the flight. I've seen cases like this before." Her words were met with a harsh laugh from Jonathan, Marcus's father, though his laugh was devoid of any mirth. "Protect the legitimacy?" Jonathan's tone was incredulous and laced with bitter irony. "So, to you, a black boy is a sign of fraud?" Gloria's mouth opened to protest, but Lisa raised her hand firmly, silencing any further outburst. Turning to Richard with calm authority, Lisa stated, "Richard, I need a full report on this incident. For now, I am ordering an immediate suspension for Gloria." At those words, Gloria's eyes widened in horror. "You can't do this. I was just following protocol," she protested weakly. Lisa's response was icy and uncompromising. "You did not follow protocol. You made a decision based on personal prejudice, and that goes against everything this airline stands for." Around them, whispers spread like wildfire. Some employees nodded subtly in agreement, while others avoided looking at Gloria, whose confidence had completely evaporated. Jonathan's gaze hardened as he looked at Gloria one last time before turning to Lisa. "I did not come here merely to ruin someone's career," he said steadily, "but I want to ensure that no other child has to endure what my son just went through." Lisa nodded solemnly, adding, "I understand, and I assure you we will make changes." Jonathan's eyes never left hers as he continued, "I want to be involved in that process." Lisa raised an eyebrow, realizing that this was an opportunity to correct deep-rooted mistakes. "Anytime you want, Mr. Coates," she replied. Marcus stood quietly beside his father, watching with a mixture of relief and admiration as his dad handled the situation with unwavering strength. No longer was he just the boy who had been humiliated by a torn ticket. Now, he was a symbol of justice, a symbol that had sparked the beginning of real change. Though the tension in the check-in area had eased somewhat, a heavy feeling still lingered in the air as passengers continued to murmur among themselves. It was as if an earthquake had just shaken the foundations of the airline, and nothing would ever be the same again. Jonathan's voice cut through the murmurs as he addressed both Richard and Lisa with piercing clarity. "I am not here to merely fire one individual. I want the entire system to change." His words resonated deeply, and even Lisa hesitated, realizing that he was demanding more than a temporary fix. "Mr. Coates, I understand the seriousness of this issue," she said carefully, "but in order to change a whole system, we need a truly viable plan." Jonathan nodded, as if he had anticipated her response. "We need a comprehensive training program to eliminate the biases that have long festered in this airline industry, a program that makes a real impact, not just a token class on paper." Lisa folded her arms as she considered the proposal. She had been the HR director for many years and had seen countless anti-discrimination training programs come and go, but something in Jonathan's tone told her that he was not asking for a superficial remedy. "Do you have any specific ideas?" she asked, unable to hide her curiosity. Jonathan's expression shifted into that determined look, a look that spoke of readiness to fight for justice. "I already have a plan." After ensuring that Marcus could board the plane without further issues, Jonathan, Lisa, and Richard moved into a small meeting room behind the operations area. A meeting that was not scheduled but was clearly necessary. Jonathan placed both his hands on the table and surveyed everyone in the room before speaking in a calm yet resolute voice. "We cannot keep letting incidents like today happen. This isn't the first time discrimination has occurred, and if we do nothing, it won't be the last." Lisa nodded in solemn agreement. She knew all too well that discrimination in the airline service industry was not a new problem. Passengers were often denied boarding without clear reasons. People of color were scrutinized more harshly, and those from different cultures were treated in ways that many did not even recognize as unfair. Jonathan continued, "I propose that we implement a mandatory training program for every employee, from flight attendants and check-in staff to security personnel and managers. This program must go beyond simply talking about discrimination. It must force participants to look inward, to reflect on the biases they might carry without even realizing it." Lisa looked at him, weighing his words carefully, then exhaled slowly as she placed her hands on the table. "I do not deny that this is an important initiative," Lisa admitted, "but it will face many obstacles. Some employees will object. There will be those who insist they have no biases, who feel this training is unnecessary, a waste of time, or worse, a punishment for one individual's mistake." Jonathan nodded in understanding. "That is exactly why this program cannot be merely theoretical. I want real-world case exercises involving experts in behavioral psychology and multicultural education. Employees need to experience firsthand the sting of unfair treatment so they understand the impact of their biases." Richard, who had remained silent until now, spoke up with cautious optimism. "That could change our entire culture," he said. "It's a bold idea." Jonathan's eyes sparkled with determination. "Exactly, and that is what we need." After a long moment of contemplation, Lisa slowly nodded. "I will take this proposal to the board of directors. But I need you to be involved in designing this program, Mr. Coates. If you are truly serious, I need your support every step of the way." Without hesitation, Jonathan met her gaze and replied firmly, "I am ready." Not long after the meeting, an internal announcement was sent out to all airline employees. The message was clear and forceful. The airline would be launching a mandatory training program on anti-discrimination and comprehensive customer service. This program would apply to everyone, from flight attendants and ground staff to security personnel and senior management, with the goal of ensuring that every passenger is treated fairly, professionally, and humanely. The announcement sparked strong reactions. Many employees were supportive, recognizing the need for change in an industry that too often allowed discrimination to pass unnoticed. However, not everyone welcomed the initiative. On internal forums, some employees complained, saying things like, "I don't see any bias in myself. Why should I have to attend this training?" Others dismissed the idea as just another public relations stunt designed to appease the public at the expense of hardworking staff. Amid all this, Gloria, suspended and under investigation, attempted to contact former colleagues, insisting that she was being scapegoated for merely doing her job. "I've worked here for over 10 years. I know what a suspicious passenger looks like," she argued bitterly. "Just because a kid's father is important, I get suspended?" Some of her colleagues expressed sympathy, while others remained silent, fearful of the consequences of speaking out. Public opinion, however, was beginning to shift decisively in favor of Jonathan and Marcus. Once news of the incident spread on social media, many outraged voices demanded accountability. "Why would a flight attendant tear up a kid's ticket right in front of everyone? That's unacceptable," read one post. "This airline needs to change how it operates." "Thank you, Jonathan Coates, for speaking up," said another. Although Marcus was only 13, he had become a beacon of hope, a symbol of courage in the face of injustice. And his ordeal had galvanized a community demanding fair treatment for all passengers. As the day drew to a close, Jonathan and Marcus knew that the battle was far from over. They had won a small victory at the check-in counter, but real change would require transforming an entire system. Marcus, now brimming with a quiet determination, sat at his desk later that evening with his laptop open, reflecting on the day's events. He had experienced blatant injustice, but he was no longer a victim. Instead, he was ready to help turn this painful episode into a catalyst for reform. Jonathan, drawing on years of experience in human resources management in the aviation industry, was determined that the forthcoming training program would have real depth. Father and son spent hours researching training models from major corporations that had successfully improved work environments and customer service through anti-bias and anti-discrimination programs. They discovered that most current programs were merely theoretical. A short session, a lecture, a video, and a form signed in passing. Jonathan knew that such superficial measures could never undo the damage of implicit biases. Instead, he envisioned a program where employees would be immersed in real-life simulated scenarios, forced to experience the sting of unfair treatment firsthand. Marcus, despite his youth, suggested that employees should role-play as passengers facing discrimination so they could truly understand its impact. Jonathan felt a surge of pride at his son's insight and quickly scribbled down ideas for practical exercises, inviting experts in behavioral psychology and multicultural education to participate. They also planned to build an internal reporting system where employees could anonymously report cases of unfair treatment. Their goal was to ensure that the airline would address issues promptly and prevent future injustices. As word of the proposed changes spread within the company, some employees embraced the initiative, while others remained skeptical. "Why do we have to participate in this training?" one voice echoed. "I don't discriminate, so why should I waste my time?" But for Jonathan and Marcus, this was not just about a single incident. It was about transforming a culture that had long allowed prejudice to fester. By the end of that long and tumultuous day, it was clear to everyone that an earthquake had just shaken the foundations of the airline. Jonathan's determined stance and Marcus's quiet resilience had sparked a movement for change. Although Gloria's suspension and the ensuing internal investigations were painful reminders of the cruelty that had been inflicted on a young boy, they also marked the beginning of a new era, one in which fairness, empathy, and respect for every individual would no longer be optional, but a fundamental part of the airline's identity. After finalizing the proposal, Jonathan scheduled a meeting with the airline's senior leadership. This was not just a fight to defend his son, but a battle to change a system that had allowed prejudice to run rampant for far too long. The official meeting day arrived, and in a spacious conference room at the airline's headquarters, the company's most influential decision-makers gathered. They listened intently as Jonathan presented his plan in a clear, well-documented manner filled with solid evidence and real-life examples. His voice was steady and passionate as he explained how one unjust act had revealed a deep flaw in the system, one that had humiliated his son, Marcus, a brave 13-year-old who had endured more than any child should. When Jonathan finished, the room fell into a heavy silence. An older board member with silver hair spoke thoughtfully. "Mr. Coates, I must admit this is a very strong initiative, but are you sure our employees will accept it?" Without missing a beat, Jonathan replied, "If they want to work in a fair environment, they will have to accept this change. If they refuse, maybe they are simply not suited for a service industry that prides itself on respect and decency." His words were like a clarion call that silenced any lingering doubts in the room. Lisa, the human resources director known for her no-nonsense approach, slowly nodded. "I support this plan," she said. One by one, other board members joined in the discussion, and soon it became clear that the proposal would be approved. Jonathan glanced at his watch. Barely a week had passed since the humiliating incident at the airport, and yet that day had ignited the spark of a revolution. At home, Marcus had followed every development through his father's messages. When he read the words, "The program has been approved," his proud smile shone through even his quiet voice of resilience. He realized that not only had he won a small victory for himself, but he had also helped set in motion a change that would benefit countless others. The atmosphere in the meeting room was as still as a lake before a storm. The most powerful people in the airline, seated around a long, polished oak table, fixed their eyes on Jonathan and Marcus, who now stood at the front. Although Marcus was just a young boy, he exuded a strength born of deep pain and determination. He held his head high and, after taking a deep breath, spoke with a sincerity that touched everyone in the room. "I'm only 13 years old, but I've had to endure an indignity that no one should ever have to experience, and I know I'm not the only one." His words, simple yet piercing, underscored the urgency of change. No one spoke at first. The room was deathly quiet. The people seated before him were those who held the power to decide the fate of thousands of employees and millions of passengers each year. They were used to making business decisions focused on profit and efficiency, but today they faced a question they might never have truly considered: justice. Jonathan looked at his son with quiet pride before continuing in a voice that combined authority with compassion. "I'm not here seeking a belated apology. I'm here because I believe that this company can be better. It can be a model in the airline industry instead of a name associated with avoidable mistakes." He paused, letting his words sink in. "We have witnessed what happens when prejudice seeps into the way employees treat passengers. If we do nothing now, we will allow these injustices to continue." A middle-aged man across the table, dressed in an expensive suit and with a furrowed brow, challenged, "Mr. Coates, no one here denies that what happened to your son was wrong. But isn't it excessive to require all employees to undergo a bias training program? Some of our staff have worked here for over 20 years without any misconduct. Why should they be held responsible for one individual's mistake?" Marcus clenched his fists, feeling the weight of every word, but before he could speak, Jonathan offered a calm yet sharp smile. "If a pilot has flown safely for 20 years, does he still need a pre-flight safety check? Of course he does, because even the most experienced professionals must adhere to standards to ensure safety. This training program is not a punishment. It is a tool, a necessary investment in the future of this airline that will ensure every passenger is treated fairly." Lisa, who had listened quietly until now, spoke up. "I agree that the system needs to change, but we cannot implement a training program without a specific, effective plan. Mr. Coates, can you guarantee that this program will truly work and not simply serve as a token measure to appease public opinion?" Jonathan nodded confidently. "We have conducted thorough research. This program is not mere theory. It includes real-life simulations where employees will experience firsthand what it feels like to be treated unfairly, so they become aware of their unconscious biases. We will have lectures from experts on implicit bias, a monitoring and reporting system, and regular follow-up sessions to ensure the training is effective." Taking a deep breath, Marcus added softly, "I know many of you here may think that this isn't a big issue, but I can assure you that if something like this happened to me, it has happened to many others. And if we do nothing, it will keep happening." Lisa nodded slowly, her eyes scanning the room with thoughtful concern. After a moment of reflective silence, she said, "I support this proposal." One by one, the other directors exchanged glances, some hesitant, others thoughtful, and then they all raised their hands in agreement. An elderly board member with silver hair sighed and said slowly, "Let's vote." Jonathan and Marcus held their breath as the votes were counted. When nearly every vote was in favor, the proposal passed, and Marcus's heart raced with hope. He turned to look at his father and saw a glimmer of pride in Jonathan's eyes, though Jonathan was not yet celebrating. He knew that passing the vote was only the first step. The real battle lay in implementing the change. Jonathan looked around the room with a calm resolve. "I want to see this program rolled out by next quarter. We cannot simply talk about change, we have to act." Lisa nodded, adding, "I will take responsibility for overseeing this process." When another director inquired who would lead the training, Jonathan replied immediately, "I will be personally involved in teaching, and my son will participate as well." The room murmured with surprise and curiosity. Marcus felt a mix of pride and determination. He was no longer just a victim of injustice. He was now standing with his father to fight against a system that had once ignored his pain. In that very room, among the most powerful figures in the airline industry, the seeds of change were being sown. The training program was no longer just a proposal on paper. It had become a tangible reality. From the very first week, all senior employees, including directors, airport managers, operations teams, and flight crew leaders, were required to attend the inaugural course. This commitment was not merely a formality, but a real overhaul of the company's culture. Many employees entered the training classroom with skepticism. They had spent decades believing they understood their customers and could handle any situation. But after a few sessions, they began to realize the truth. Marcus was no longer merely the catalyst for change. He had become an integral part of the process. He attended workshops, listened to heartfelt discussions, and witnessed colleagues confess that they had, unknowingly, acted on bias. An older flight attendant admitted, "I never thought I had biases, but in this training, I realized there were times I judged passengers solely by their appearance." A seasoned check-in agent confessed that he always felt more anxious when he saw a passenger who looked different, a realization that struck him deeply. Even a young pilot shared sincerely, "I used to think discrimination wasn't a big deal until I heard Marcus's story. I began to wonder, how would I feel if my own child were treated like that?" Meanwhile, Gloria, who had been suspended following the incident, continued to protest that she had done nothing wrong. She saw the forced training as nothing more than a punishment. In her first class, when asked to share her thoughts on discrimination, she crossed her arms and declared in a challenging tone, "I don't think I need to be here. I am not racist. I'm just doing my job." Jonathan, present to oversee the training, said nothing but watched her closely. The exercise soon moved to role-playing scenarios, and Gloria was assigned a situation where she had to act as a foreign customer speaking broken English while being met with impatience. Within minutes, Gloria experienced the helplessness, frustration, and crushing humiliation that her own actions had inflicted on Marcus. When the role-play ended, she sat silently, a single sigh escaping her as she muttered, I didn't know that feeling could be so awful." Whether she would truly change remained uncertain, but the training forced every participant to confront the consequences of their unconscious actions. Throughout the program, Marcus gradually came to an important realization. No one is born with biases, but if they are not recognized, they will control how people treat others. He was transforming from a boy who had been unjustly humiliated into a leader determined to create real change. One day, after a group discussion, a middle-aged man who had worked in the airline for his entire life approached Marcus and said softly, "Boy, thank you. You have made us look at ourselves." Marcus nodded, understanding that every significant change begins with a small, brave act. 3 months after the training program was launched, the first positive results began to show. Complaints about discriminatory attitudes dropped noticeably, and employees started reporting instances of unfair behavior by their colleagues, something they had once been too afraid to do. Some even took the initiative to suggest new ways to improve the passenger experience, not only regarding discrimination, but also in overall service. The airline, once fixated solely on revenue and performance, was gradually emerging as a pioneering example of how a company could transform its internal culture. And it all began with one torn ticket. That evening, after a long day of working with his father on the training program, Marcus sat quietly in his room, flipping through his notes from the very first day. He had written, "I don't want to just be a victim." Now, he understood that his experience had sparked something far greater than personal vindication. It had ignited a movement toward a more just and compassionate future for everyone who flew with the airline. In that moment, as he reflected on everything that had happened, from the public humiliation to the groundbreaking changes in company policy, Marcus felt a deep sense of purpose. He realized that real change required both courage and persistence, and that by standing up to injustice, he had not only reclaimed his dignity, but had also paved the way for a better tomorrow. Marcus closed his notebook with a soft smile, knowing that his journey was far from over. He had vowed long ago that he would not remain a victim. "I want to change everything," he had written on that very first page. And now, at 13, he had done what many adults would never dare to do. He stood up and challenged an entire system. That autumn morning at the airline headquarters, the board of directors finally made their decision regarding the incident with Gloria. The results of the internal investigation were announced to both employees and the media. Gloria was fired, not because of external pressure or a media uproar, but because clear evidence of her repeated misconduct had surfaced. The investigation revealed not only the disgraceful act that had humiliated Marcus by tearing up his ticket, but also uncovered several past incidents in which she had discriminated against customers. Incidents that had long been swept under the rug. Marcus received the news from his father Jonathan while sitting on the living room sofa and reading a text message. Gloria has been fired. The airline will make an official announcement this afternoon. He read the message over and over, a mix of relief and bittersweet satisfaction stirring within him. He wasn't gloating or celebrating someone's misfortune. Rather, he felt that justice had finally been served. Sometimes, justice does not bring a sense of victory in the traditional sense. It simply restores a balance that was long overdue. Deep inside, Marcus understood that his stand was never about revenge. It was about creating lasting change for everyone who might face injustice. Later that day, Marcus looked up at his father, whose eyes were still filled with a reflective intensity even after driving the matter to this point. "Do you think she will change?" Marcus asked softly, a trace of concern in his voice. Jonathan sighed and replied, "Maybe, maybe not. But that's no longer our responsibility." He went on, "What matters is that people see this and understand that injustice cannot be tolerated." Marcus nodded slowly. That was what he truly cared about, ensuring that every person who walked through those airport doors would be treated with the dignity they deserved. In a small cafe near the airport, Gloria sat alone, staring at the message on her phone from the Human Resources Department. "Your contract has been officially terminated. We will assist with the necessary paperwork to help you find a new job. If you have any questions, please contact us." Her grip tightened around the phone as she absorbed the reality of what she had lost. Gloria couldn't believe that everything had unraveled over a single ticket. In her mind, she had always believed she was simply doing her job, but the investigation had shown a pattern of discrimination, a pattern she had never dared to confront. Over the past few days, she had noticed subtle changes within the company. Colleagues who once supported her now attended mandatory training sessions, and younger flight attendants emerged from those sessions with new perspectives, their eyes bright with understanding. Gloria felt increasingly isolated, for if she were to change, it would mean admitting that she had been wrong from the very beginning. Her mistake was not beyond repair, but admitting it required a courage she wasn't sure she possessed. After a long moment of inner conflict, Gloria sighed and left the cafe. As she stepped outside, she caught sight of a large airline poster on a nearby wall that read, "Every passenger deserves to be treated fairly." She stood there for what felt like an eternity, absorbing those simple yet powerful words, before turning away and walking off into the crisp autumn air. Meanwhile, the airline pressed forward with its groundbreaking training program. This new initiative was no longer just an internal course, it was attracting attention from rival airlines. Some competitors even reached out to Jonathan, curious about how the program would be implemented. Marcus, now recognized not only as a victim of injustice but also as a catalyst for change, was invited to speak at a major conference on social justice in the service industry. Standing before a hall filled with adults, business executives, CEOs, and researchers, he shared his story with calm resolve. His voice, steady and sincere, reached every corner of the room as he concluded his speech with words his father had taught him. "Change is never easy, but if we do not start, it will never happen." The entire hall rose to applaud his bravery, and though Marcus did not smile with self-satisfaction, he felt an overwhelming sense of rightness in what he had done. That evening, when Marcus returned home, he sat by the window in his bedroom, gazing at the darkening sky. He remembered the day at the airport, the crushing humiliation as Gloria tore his ticket in front of a silent crowd, the searing anger he had to swallow, and the overwhelming relief when his father had arrived like a rock in the midst of the storm. He recalled every moment of that painful day and all that had happened afterward. Marcus realized that he was no longer the child who would endure silently. He had learned to stand up not only for himself, but for all those who might be mistreated in the future. He looked over at the notebook on his desk, the one in which he had chronicled every thought and emotion throughout this journey. On the first page he had written, "I don't want to be just a victim. I want to change everything." With a deep breath, Marcus took a pen and wrote a new line beneath his words, and I did. He set the pen down and leaned back, feeling a profound calm in his heart. The journey was far from over, but Marcus knew he had come much further than he ever imagined. As he and his father left the airport the next day, Jonathan turned to him with a proud smile and said, "You have done something that many adults wouldn't even dare to do." Marcus looked up, meeting his father's gaze, a gaze filled with respect, pride, and true acknowledgement. It wasn't about doing something grand or heroic. It was about having the courage to speak up when silence was easier. His smile was gentle, not one of triumph but of quiet determination. He understood that while the battle against injustice had only just begun, it was a battle worth fighting. News of the airline's revamped training program spread far beyond its headquarters. Media outlets, social justice forums, and articles soon carried the story of how one torn ticket had sparked a revolution. One morning, Jonathan received a call from another major airline, eager to learn about their new initiative. Within months, 3 other companies reached out, expressing their desire to implement similar programs. Marcus watched all of this unfold from the sidelines, never seeking the spotlight but knowing in his heart that he was an essential part of the change. One day, while sitting in the living room, Marcus received a message from a stranger who had experienced a similar injustice at the airport. "Thank you, Marcus. I went through something similar and never had the courage to speak up. Your story made me realize I'm not alone." Marcus sat quietly for a long moment before replying, "We're not alone." That simple message carried the weight of countless silent voices finally finding strength. Then, on a late afternoon after a meeting at the airport, Marcus saw a familiar figure near the check-in counter. It was Gloria. She was no longer in the airline uniform but dressed in plain clothes, standing with her arms crossed as if deep in thought. When their eyes met, she hesitated for a long moment before approaching him slowly. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said in a low, hoarse voice, far removed from the sharpness and defensiveness of before. "But I think I need to say this. I used to believe I was simply doing my job. I never stopped to think if I was truly right." Marcus listened silently, his expression calm and thoughtful. Gloria continued, "I realize now that I was wrong." It wasn't an easy admission, and though Marcus did not offer immediate forgiveness, he recognized the significance of her words. He nodded slowly. In that silent moment, he acknowledged that change begins when one has the courage to face the truth. "Thank you for not staying silent," she added quietly, before turning and walking away, leaving behind the remnants of her past. A month later, as the training program was fully integrated into the company and even adopted by several other airlines, Marcus received an invitation to speak at a major conference on social justice in the service industry. Holding the invitation in his hand, he turned to his father, who smiled warmly and asked, "Do you want to go?" Without hesitation, Marcus replied, yes. He had come so far since that painful day at the airport when he was unjustly humiliated. Now he was not only fighting for his own justice, but had become an inspiration for others to stand up as well. As Marcus stepped out of the house that day, he carried with him the firm belief that injustice might spread if left unchecked, but that justice, when nurtured, can spread even further. He knew that change doesn't come from silence. It comes from those who dare to speak up. Marcus had started his journey as a young boy who had been an unwitting victim of discrimination. Instead of remaining silent, he had faced the entire system head-on to demand justice, not for revenge, but for meaningful change. Thanks to his courage, determination, and the unwavering support of his father, Marcus had helped change an entire system, inspiring countless others to speak out against injustice. His story was not just about him. It was about all of us who believe that every person deserves respect. Have you ever witnessed or experienced an injustice that left you feeling powerless? Would you choose silence, or would you stand up for what is right? Always remember, A single voice can make a difference. In the end, as Marcus looked out the window at the vast open sky, he recalled every moment of pain and every victory he had achieved. He understood that his journey was only the beginning of a much larger quest for justice, a quest that would continue as long as there was injustice to fight. And with that thought, he whispered softly to himself, "I did change everything."